As was indicated, my presentation is not going to be a technical presentation. I'm basically going to try to tell a story in terms of what we've been doing to turn around our economy in Lambton County. So who am I? I work for something called Sarnia-Lambton Economic Partnership, which is a public-private sector partnership that's responsible for economic development. I have a 16-member board that I report to. And that board has representation from elected officials, from labor, from First Nations, from large business, and from small business. Some people might say that's complicated. I'd say it's inclusive. And one of the strengths of that, it has enabled us to get everyone rowing and steering in the same direction. So we've been able to set vision, work towards that vision, and I would suggest we're attaining it. It says Sarnia-Lambton. Sarnia-Lambton is Lambton County. We say Sarnia-Lambton from a branding point of view because many people don't know where Lambton is, but they've had likely heard of Sarnia. It's located at the southern tip of Lake Huron. We're on the border with Port Huron, Michigan. We're an hour north of Detroit, 3 hours west of Toronto, 1 hour west of London. And a key attribute for us is our location and the easy access to the North American marketplace. We're a small municipality, 129,000 people. There's about 85,000 people in the CMA. There's about 250,000 people within 60 miles that we can draw upon in terms of a workforce. The current unemployment rate is 8%, which is too high. We had it down to about 6% before the recession in 2007. Unfortunately, a lot of diversification that we had achieved in the 10 years previously that we lost with downturn in the automotive industry, with loss of building companies that made products for the building products industry, and loss of call centers. So we got to slowly climb back up. And I guess the other thing I would say on that is the Ontario economy has been outperforming the Canadian economy. But traditionally, we've been at a sync with the Ontario economy because we've been a petrochemical complex, and our fortunes have also been tied to the petrochemical industry and what happens in Alberta and the U.S. Gulf Coast. We are one of the fastest growing border crossings into the United States. And if you know Windsor, the difference with the Sarnia crossing is highway, border, and then highway. There's been about $300 million that has been spent on infrastructure improvements on the highway system on both the American side and the Canadian side. There's also been a lot of technology put into improving trucks before they actually reach the border, as well as increasing the number of booths. So basically efficiency at the border. In terms of rail, our claim to fame there is the tunnel under the St. Clair River, which is the main connecting link between Halifax, Nova Scotia and Chicago. We have one of the largest flatway rail yards in the Great Lakes, but we've also had a lot of rail car storage built in the last 5 years, and that has been important to the chemical companies in our area. And we also have 4 companies that provide rail car repair. So we have a pretty vibrant rail industry. In terms of water, we're the largest port on Lake Huron. We're a major center in the winter for ship repair. Recently, the city of Sarnia took title of the harbor from the federal government, and there's now an industry group working with the city for management of the harbor, and I think that will be positive as we move forward. Air transportation, also very well served. Daily flights from Sarnia to Toronto. We're an hour and a half from Detroit International. A lot of people in Sarnia also fly out of Flint, which is just over an hour away. If you're going to Western Canada, there's good flights out of London, and there's also good flights out of Toronto, particularly to Europe, 2.5 hours away. If we think about our economy and community, it's been tied to oil and agriculture for a very long time. In the 1850s, settlers in the Petrolia area used to use the gum beds to waterproof their canoes. And then in 1858, there was a fellow named James Miller Williams, and he was digging a well for water, and he discovered some black stuff that kind of spurted up. And that resulted in the first major oil boom in North America. And within 2 or 3 years, there were 4,000 people in Oil Springs. There was horse-drawn buses. There was paved streets. There was oil lamp-lit streets. So we were leading technology. In 1891, the Fairbanks Oil Company was formed, which is now the oldest continuous oil company in the world. And they invented something called the jerker system, which enabled oil to be collected from wells at the same time, basically putting a steam-powered engine at the head. And that jerker system is actually still operating in Petrolia as part of the Fairbanks Historical Reserve, and pumps a couple hundred barrels of oil a day. In the 1800s, that's also when Imperial Oil established an operation in London, with operations in Lambton County, eventually going from Petrolia to Sarnia. And then came World War II, and as part of World War II, the Japanese cut off the natural supply of rubber. And one of Canada's commitment to World War II was the development of synthetic rubber, which led to establishment of Palmer Corporation, which built next to Imperial Oil. And within 18 months, they built a large petrochemical complex. 1942, Dow Chemical also came, and that was really the birth of petrochemicals within Lambton County. And from the 1950s through to the 1970s, it was boomtown. 1973 was the oil crisis. The wheels kind of came off the bus. A lot of R&D was pulled back into the U.S. The smallest plants were no longer globally competitive, and that's when the downhill started in Sarnia. In the 1980s, there was some more investment, but by late 1990s, I came in 1996, the unemployment rate was 16%. The chemical industry said, "We're not your future, go find something else." And they actually did provide some money for economic development. And we started to look at automotive and call centers and food processing and other avenues. Agriculture has always been important to us. And I show a picture there, and that's a picture of a machine that was used to harvest hemp. And Lambton County, for the First World War, grew flax. That flax was made into material for wings for aircraft. And there was also experimentation done with hemp fibers. So we've had a long history of oil, chemicals, and looking at bio-based materials. I like this quote from John Scully. It says, "The future belongs to those who see possibilities before they become obvious." In 2000s, we started looking at bio-based chemistry and looking at how we could marry oil industry and chemical industry together. And at that point in time, it was not something that was mainstream, but our research indicated that there was a potential future there. And over the last 10 years, I guess 12 years, we've developed this thing that we're calling a biohybrid chemistry complex. We've gotten far more use out of the gasoline engine than people ever predicted, and there's a lot more oil than people ever predicted. So we didn't see the oil age ending anytime soon. And we do have oil that comes from Alberta. It takes about 3 weeks from a barrel of oil to get from Edmonton or wherever in fields there to Sarnia. We have 3 refineries that are the mainstay of the local economy. In recent years, we have natural gas coming from Marcellus and Utica. There's 3 new pipelines that will be built by 2017. We're being told by Union Gas that our pricing will be below Henry Hub within 2 years, and Henry Hub is the main trading and storage area in the United States. And then we also have good access to biomass. About 65% of the corn grown in Canada is grown in southern Ontario. There's also access to forestry biomass. And as I indicated in the earlier part of my presentation, we have good access to markets, especially the North American markets. So if we look at putting these three feedstocks as our platform, then that should give us diversity and enable us to establish the critical mass required to support a chemistry complex. And I put on here a timeline. I was thinking about this last night. I just made this slide up last night. In terms of, we've been doing this now, in terms of the biohybrid initiative, for 16 years. In 2001, the chemistry people formed something called the Ontario Chemical Value Chain Initiative. Initially, it was looking at older workers, process operators in the chemical plants. But in 2000, within 2 years, the petrochemical industry went from having 20 billion surplus, North America-wide, to 10 billion deficit. So again, there was a lot more pain being felt, and there was a feeling that we have to do something else beyond traditional chemicals. In 2003, I led an initiative where we bought Dow Chemical's former head office facility and 300 acres of land. And during that downturn in the chemical industry, we had a lot of R&D leave our community with the closure of Dow, and Lanxess downsized a bit, and so did Imperial Oil and DuPont. And one of the tragedies of our community is that when we had those large companies, there was no effort to get public R&D in our area, so a major university or a National Research Council type facility. It was all R&D that was in residence to the companies. So there was a need to get R&D, and we bought the Dow assets. We formed a relationship with the University of Western Ontario, and this year, that research park just received the award for the best commercialization center in North America, which is a pretty good achievement in 13 years. In 2006, there was something formed called the Southern Ontario Bioproducts Institute and Southern Ontario Bio-Auto Council, and these were initiatives that came out of the province of Ontario. They did serve a purpose for 4 or 5 years. Unfortunately, they didn't have business models that would keep them sustainable, so they ended up folding. In 2006, Suncor built a large ethanol plant, taking advantage of the renewable portfolio standard. Then in 2008, that was I'd call it another significant milestone. We were able to get $15 million from the NRC Centers of Excellence Network for Commercialization. That enabled $5 million for a capital fund, and then the balance was used for operations and for working with Lambton College and the research park in terms of developing programming. The Sustainable Chemistry Alliance Fund was launched. There was investment made in by now about a dozen companies, and a number of those have gone public. So that's been very positive for us. And Bioindustrial Innovation Canada is really an extension of the Sustainable Chemistry Alliance, and it was basically a governance decision from an operational point of view. 2010, Suncor doubled their ethanol plant. We had a number of pilot plants at the research park, because with the research park money, we had about $15 million to build labs for large scale-up. BioAmber opened a succinic acid plant in 2015, and the BioAmber investment was very important to our community. Sustainable Chemistry Alliance had made a capital loan to BioAmber. They looked at 100 sites across North America. They eventually decided on Lambton County. We got a lot of press out of that, and BioAmber has been an outstanding company for us to deal with in terms of building our chemistry complex. More recently, Lambton College has established a Center of Excellence in Energy and Industrial Biomaterials They're also now one of the largest colleges in Canada in terms of doing applied research. 2016, Comet announced they're going to build a cellulosic sugars plant, and we just recently got $20 million for a Center of Excellence for the Commercialization for Sustainable Chemistry, which will involve the Research Park, Lambton College, our organization, and BIC. BIC led, though. I talked about rowing and steering together. As a community in 2010, we had all community players, labor, business, come together, and the vision was to build a skilled entrepreneurial workforce that will power a prosperous economy led by globally unique, renewable and biochemical energy sectors. I'm not going to talk about energy here today, but renewable energy is also a big part of our plan. If we look at our hybrid chemistry cluster, the thing that's been happening is that the number of bio-renewable-based companies has been growing relative to traditional fossil companies. Two biggest opportunities in traditional fossils that we have right now is Nova Chemicals is looking at building a new ethylene plant. That will be a $1.5 to $2 billion decision, which we expect to be made sometime in 2017. The Marcus West Sunoco Logistics pipeline was constructed to bring gas as Nova converted its operations from naphtha to ethane. There's a lot of work going in Sarnia, so we're actually fairly confident that that investment will happen. If we look at the map there, it says 80% of Ontario soybeans and corn grown within 200 kilometers. There's been a lot of work done in the last couple of years on looking at the sugars supply chain. There's been a co-op that has been put in place that has worked closely with Comet and is now also working with others. There's been a lot of documentation done in terms of looking at corn stover, how much corn stover can be taken off the fields. I think people are talking about 30 to 37%. There's no commodity pricing mechanism for corn stover the way there is for corn or soybeans. So it's been a lot of work done in terms of trying to get a price that's fair for farmers but also competitive for industry. The Comet bio facility that I mentioned will be the first customer for the co-op. And the co-op working, the BIC initiative looked at 10 different technologies. Comet was the one that was chosen, but there are other technologies that can work with different applications. If we think about our hybrid chemistry cluster, it's all along the St. Clair River. It's concentrated over a very small area, and within 4 or 5 kilometers, you can go from bench scale to full-scale plant. And I've been involved in working to put together sites from 2 acres to, we worked with Suncor a number of years ago and put together a 6,000 acre site for a 250,000 per day refinery. So we have good ability to scale in terms of providing site needs. And the other thing I would point out is that we're also a world-class example of environmental remediation. There's a salmon derby held every year at the base of the St. Clair River. And on Lake Huron itself, there are no chemical plants. In fact, I don't know if there's really no industry left on Lake Huron anymore. And the biggest pollutant would be agricultural runoff. And with all the developments of nutrient management systems in the farming system, the water quality continues to improve in Lake Huron. And we have a number of beaches now that have achieved blue water status. And the St. Clair River is also very close to being completely delisted. I think the leadership in our community around bio-based chemicals has really shifted to Bioindustrial Innovation Canada. I'm on the board of BIC. BIC has far more resources and expertise than the community has at this point in time. And I think they've established excellent relationships with BioAmber and a number of the other companies that are involved in looking at the area. I think one of the things that we also decided on early on in our community is that we weren't going to focus on R&D. We didn't have the educational base for it. There's a lot of research and development being done in universities and in companies, and that we need to create jobs, and that the real opportunity was going to be on commercialization, and that's where the weakness was in the Canadian system. We've also focused on the value chain. And the thing with value chains, whether it's natural gas or biomass, if you can make it into a value-added product, that value can be a tenfold increase. And then if you can even go further down and make it into automotive parts or plastic films, then you even get more value in terms of return on investment and jobs. And that's actually been one of the problems of Canada. We've been kind of hewers of wood and drawers of water. And we're trying to not go that route. And when people talk about bio-based chemistry, they often talk about fuels. And I think we've also made a conscientious decision that we're focused on the chemical side more than on the fuel side, because that's where we see the best growth opportunities and the best potential for spin-offs. Building a knowledge-based infrastructure. So I already mentioned the research park and Lambton College. Lambton College has a 60-year history of working with industry, particularly in process technologies and energy technologies. The research park, we have 300 acres that surrounds it. It's now 98% occupied, so we need to find new tenants that want to build at the park. And I think that we've developed this, we're calling commercialization hub, where we work with companies. Lambton College can provide a lot of applied research. Student assisted, also work with Western University and other universities. Incubation can happen at the park or in some private sites that we have. And then BIC can really help with the acceleration to commercialization, and for the right companies, even make potential equity investment. And I think one of the strengths of BIC is that it's mainly composed of industry leaders. The present chair is Bill White, who was the former CEO of DuPont. We have Paul Clark, who used to be the head of R&D for Nova Chemicals and Dow at one point in time. Don McCabe, who's president of the Ontario OFA, Ontario Federation of Agriculture. So we have a strong, active board. It's not a passive board, it's an active board that brings a lot of contacts and knowledge to help the companies that we invest in, and even the companies that we don't invest in, but also provide guidance to. This is just a shot, this whole notion of research, startup, and graduate in terms of the position that we're taking at the research park. We don't want tenants for life, which you see in some incubators. A good incubator gets you in, gets you to the place where you want to move out and scale up. And that's the approach that we're taking. The other critical part of our cluster is we have over 100 engineering, metal fabrication, and industrial services companies. And this is why this biohybrid chemistry is important, because it takes a lot of business to maintain that number of companies. And one of the things that we've been doing with those companies also is they've had a history of serving Imperial Oil and Shell and Dow, but serving bioamber or ecosynthetics and woodlawn, that's a different client. So we've also been doing a lot of work with those companies in terms of kind of changing their mindset of how they work with companies that are not as well capitalized, that don't have the same depth of staff resources, that are on tight timelines, and that are experimenting with new technologies. So basically, and the other thing with those companies is getting them to adopt more lean manufacturing processes. We're seeing more automation in the shops. So they have to become more competitive globally. As part of that, we're involved in building something we're calling an oversized load corridor, where there'll be a dedicated road system that can take large fabricated modules, 30 by 30 by 120, to the harbor so that they can be exported to global markets. And the bioamber plant that was recently built in Sarnia, CalGore built a number of the pots and pans that went in to that operation, which is bio-based and not traditional chemistry. In terms of our workforce, it's basically a technically oriented workforce. We have less people with university education than the province as a whole, but we have a higher number of people with high school graduation and technical training. And that is the strength of our area, is in operations, and that's why it also works for commercialization, and over time we need to build that university part as well. Union gas is critical to our area in terms of competitiveness. We have one of the second largest natural gas reserves in storage area in North America. There's a lot of pipelines feeding in to the Union complex, which gives it diversity and stability. Natural gas is not only important to the petrochemical company, but it's also important to bio-based company in terms of keeping their energy costs down. But we also are seeing more interest in gas to liquids type operations. And last year we actually have a study to develop a new polypropylene plant that we're shopping around now to try and get some interest. Corporate tax rates is important, and Ontario and Canada have kept tax rates low, which helps us be competitive. I mean, in the U.S., you can still do a master limited partnership and still get low taxes, but it is still a good thing for us. One of the strengths for us is we can provide brownfield and greenfield sites. And so we have sites that had chemical plants on them that have basically been torn down. And what you're seeing there is the former Dow chemical sites. There used to be 2,200 people working on this site, and there was more than 20 petrochemical plants at one point in time. Presently, the plant that you see on your right is a 540 megawatt cogen plant that's owned by TransAlta, and that part of the picture is a 170 acre Blue Water Energy Park. One of the challenges that we have in Ontario is increased electricity pricing. However, you can buy power, what we call behind the fence, directly from TransAlta. So if power costs $100 a block out on the grid, you can get it about $40 off on the TransAlta site. There's docking facilities in place. There's rail facilities in place in terms of being able to access nitrogen, oxygen, all the different feedstocks that you need. So basically what we're selling is, in terms of time to market, we can give you sites that are serviced and have infrastructure in place at competitive pricing. Some recent wins. Nova Chemicals has spent about $700 million in our area in the last 7 or 8 years. And as I said, we're competing for that $1.5 to $2 billion plant that hopefully will be announced in the first quarter of next year. BioAmber has built their succinic acid plant, and we also are competing for their next plant. Comet, which is the cellulosic sugars plant. Ubiquity Solar is not chemistry per se in terms of bio-based chemistry, but it's still a chemistry. And they are looking at building a world-class polysilicon plant on the TransAlta site. And Union gas is critical for us. As I say, we've got those 3 pipelines, the Rover, Utopia, and Nexus, that will bring more gas to the area in the next couple of years by 2018. I asked, what's helped us? I think one of the things that's helped us in terms of hybrid chemistry, particularly on the bio side, is recognition by senior governments that bio-based chemistry is a growth opportunity area. Bio-based chemistry is growing at about, is based to grow at 11% a year for bio-based chemicals over the next, up to 2020. It's a $300 billion industry based upon some recent new U.S. numbers. and we see continued opportunity there. I think the government has also been fairly supportive in terms of policy for innovation, the SR&D tax credits. Certainly we've had a lot of companies that have been able to take advantage of Sustainable Development Technology Canada in terms of piloting and work for scale-up. And there's also been good programs for workforce development, which has helped us with Lambton College and with the engineering fabrication companies, and the loan-back guarantees that some of the companies have been able to get. And people always talk about the U.S. and the big numbers that are available in the U.S., but you have to go get a bank to put behind that USDA money that you got, and sometimes that is not as easily as it looks. Challenges, access to capital continues to be a problem. People trying to go to 3 to 5 million for those small pilot plants, and then when you get to the large commercialization, you know, we have people looking for anywhere from 20 to 50 million dollars, and we're a small country, and accessing that level of capital is difficult, and the governments can only fund so many ventures. And unlike the mining industry where you can use flow-through shares, we don't have those types of mechanisms to access capital. In our area, Ontario has made a mess of the electricity system, so we struggle outside of the Lanxess, or Lankio now, and TransAlta sites. Uncertainty with government legislation in terms of carbon pricing. In Ontario, we're putting in place a cap-and-trade system. We don't know what's going to happen beyond 2020, so that is concerning to some of the companies. But we do feel the Ontario government will work to have some solutions that enable us to be competitive. Also, there is no national bio-based chemistry strategy for Canada. There's been lots of research papers done and lots of think tanks, but in terms of having a national strategy that has targets, and one of the things in Sarnia that we've always had is targets. And we had a target about 10 years ago, $1 billion. To attract $1 billion in new investment was our target. We didn't put actual job behind that. Some people talked about 5,000, 10,000 jobs, but as a country, we have no targets that I'm aware of. Hopefully someone's going to tell me I'm wrong. There has been support for commercialization, but it's been limited, and we have no large industry R&D programs. We don't have a BASF or DuPont or Dow or some company that's putting a lot of money in R&D, at least in the Sarnia cluster, into bio-based chemistry. And I would also say, based upon my involvement with the Sustainable Chemistry Alliance, is that there's a limited number of managers with the skills for bio-based chemistry in terms of doing scale-ups and commercializing technology. And that's, I guess, the end of my technical presentation. I would tell you also that Sarnia is a great place to live. I guess the other thing I would say is I lived in Canada for 10 years before I went to Sarnia. And in Canada, the notion was if you had a dry basement, a good computer, and I have to say a good spouse, then you were away to the races. But with bio-based chemistry, you're very limited in terms of what you can do with your grade 12 or your chemistry, university chemistry set and your stovetop. So the barriers to entry are a lot higher. And that means it makes it much more difficult to scale up and get rapid growth in your community. Sarnia is a great place to live. We have new hospital development. There's great recreational resorts. Housing prices are very affordable, and we have been seeing a lot more movement from the Toronto area. You can have urban living to rural acreage. And there's one of the best places in the world for golf. You can play golf anywhere from $10 to $60, and 60s on the high end. Great beaches. The beach actually runs from the rural area right to the rural area. I live 6 minutes from my office, and I mean, it's like paradise. And that's my story.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mallay. You know, I like to tell that the cities has a major role to play in all of this bioeconomy and all of the development of the bioeconomy. You got the support of the city of Sarnia. Can you tell us what makes the mayor of Sarnia believe in that project, believe in that bioeconomy stuff?
I think that we've had a research-based process, and we've been able to provide fact and educate the politicians as we went along. I think the other thing that helps is we have a community where a lot of people who are farmers have also worked in the chemical industry, so it makes it easier from an education perspective. I think in 2008, when BIC got the money, we hired a fellow named Murray McLaughlin, and Murray has done an outstanding job in terms of traveling the world and basically helping to put us on the map. And more recently, Sandy Marshall, who is the former country manager for Lanxess, has taken over in that position, and Murray is still active.
Question? Yes?
I would like to ask you something about the financial support to the startups, university startups, in order to raise the level of activity to what we call the pre-pilot plans. What kind of financial support do you can have in your region?
So I mean, I think a lot of it is classical. A lot of people use what I call the love money. So initially it's their friends and their savings and their house. And then they've been successful in leveraging government money through Sustainable Development Technology Canada, or the province had a commercialization demonstration fund. So people get a lot of that money together. And then there's the whole notion of the valley of death, where they've exhausted all those sources. And that's where I think where BIC has played a role. And the investments that we've made have been anywhere from $250,000 to $500,000. But the endorsement of BIC, given us a chemistry-based organization, I think has given credibility to their project, and that has helped them get further follow-on investment.
Why this question? Because in Canada, we are always based on the principle of partnership. All the funding, government funding agencies require some money from the private sector.
Yes.
But in Canada, and especially in Quebec, this money doesn't come. There is always a kind of hesitation factor when they invest in something like that.
Yeah.
And with respect to what we see in the USA, it's not very encouraging as a situation. So, do we have any?
No, I mean, I think raising capital in Canada is definitely challenging. I mean, the companies that are most successful are companies that have a lot of skin in the game. There's no question that you can quickly reach the point where you need other people's money to be successful, and the most successful people are the ones that use other people's money. I think a lot of the best companies that we see get financing are companies that have done their research in terms of their market oriented as opposed to just technology oriented, and they're good at telling their story and telling what they're going to use the capital for. It's amazing how many companies come and say we need X amount of capital, but they can't prioritize exactly what they're going to use that capital for and what return you're actually going to achieve for that capital.
Thank you.
Other question? Yes?
I was wondering what percentage of farmers are interested to sell their corn stover to Bioember or Comet, the participation rate of farmers?
So farmers will sell their commodity where there's a market. So what has happened here is that it's really Sandy Marshall in our case, went out and Don McCabe and got all the farmers together and said this could be a market and these could be customers. And there were some research studies done. And so there was a study done to look at how much corn stover there would be needed to support a plant, what the price of that stover would have to be. There was also some work done looking at how to harvest the stover. A lot of that technology is actually technology that exists today in terms of balers, windrowers, and stuff that you use to stack it. And there were some field trials done. And basically the co-op is going to provide feedstock to Comet. So that's the customer. And that's the first one. But we are starting to get more interest from other companies that are interested in that producer co-op type organization. And we're also in our area grow soybean, or not soybeans, we do grow soybeans, but sugar beets. And we're seeing some interest in doing the same thing around sugar beets.
So how long it takes to convince the farmer to?
You get 44 cases of beer, and you get them all in the. So, I mean, you can, these things you do in the off-season, and you get some people involved that have worked in the oil chemical industry and are also farmers. And over a period of 6 months to a year, you can get a deal brokered.
Other question? Okay, so we can thank all.
Okay.